Hey everyone, welcome to a new guide for Last Epoch, where we're exploring a solid build just in time for the upcoming season of the Weaver, also known as the Tomb of Erased. This build kicks off as a mage and shifts into the Rune Master, focusing on rune invocation to take control of the battlefield. Whether you're just starting out or have plenty of hours in the game, this guide will walk you through using runes to tackle enemies and challenges effectively. So, get comfortable, grab your setup, and let's dive into this build. This guide is based on the current version of the game, as the patch notes for the upcoming season haven't been released yet. That means this build is essentially a blueprint or a sketch. It's a starting point, not the final picture. Once the patch notes drop, I'll update this guide to reflect any changes, new mechanics, or adjustments that come with the update. Until then, keep in mind that some details here might shift depending on what the patch reveals. For now though, this should give you a solid foundation to work with as we await the official changes. Let's start with the Mage setup for the early game. At this stage, we're working with a basic Mage, and the skill options are pretty limited. We'll be using Lightning Blast to get by for now. It's not the best, but it's what we've got. The early skills aren't great until we unlock Glacial later on, which is when things start to pick up. Until then, Lightning Blast is our main tool. One thing to know, this early setup, up until we get Runic Invocation, really depends on your gear to feel decent. Without good drops, it can be a bit rough, so keep an eye out for armor that helps. If you find something with Frostbite Chance, Ignite, or any elemental bonus like that, grab it and adjust your skills to match. For example, Ignite Chance means you lean into fire damage. Frostbite means cold. Whatever gear you pick up, spec into that element to make it work until we transition into the Rune Master later. For now, stick with Lightning Blast. Equip what you find, and we'll build from there. Next, let's talk about adding Flame Ward into the mix. Once you pick up Flame Ward, it's a solid addition to our early Mage setup. At its base, it's a defensive skill. Pop it, and you get a shield to soak up some hits. But here's where it gets interesting. We can tweak it to fit whatever gear you found. Since we're already adapting to stuff like Frostbite Chance or Ignite from drops, Flame Ward can follow that same logic. If your gear's leaning toward fire with Ignite Chance, keep it as a fire-based skill. Got cold bonuses like Frostbite? You can spec it toward that later with the right nodes. It's flexible, and we'll shape it as we go. What makes Flame Ward really shine though, is when we start building into its reflection potential. With the right setup, especially once we get some gear or passives boosting reflected damage, it turns into a surprising damage source. Enemies hit you, and that damage bounces back at them, scaled up by reflection modifiers. Early on, it won't be massive, but it's a nice bonus while we're still relying on Lightning Blast and waiting for bigger skills. So, slot Flame Ward in, match it to your gear's element, and start experimenting with reflection if you can. It's a small step now that pays off more as we head toward the Rune Master. Let's wrap up the early game stage with a quick summary of our setup. So far, we're starting as a Mage with Lightning Blast as our go-to skill. It's basic, but gets us through the early slog since the starting options are limited. We hold out until we unlock Glacial, which is when the build starts to feel better. But fair warning, Glacial is pretty mana hungry, so we'll need a fix for that. Next, we've got Flame Ward in the mix. It's a defensive shield that we can tweak based on gear, fire if you've got Ignite Chance, cold if Frostbite's your thing, and it pulls double duty with reflected damage if you spec into it. That reflection starts small, but adds some bite as enemies hit you. To keep things running smoothly, especially with Glacial's mana cost, we're adding Mana Reave. This skill's a lifesaver early on. It hits enemies and siphons back some mana, cutting down the strain of spamming Glacial once we grab it. Without much gear to boost Mana Regen yet, Mana Reave shortcuts that problem and keeps us casting. So, the plan is Lightning Blast for damage, Flame Ward for defense and a bit of reflection, Mana Reave to fuel the mana pool, and then Glacial as our first big upgrade when it's available. Now let's move into the endgame and explore our Runic Invocation setup as a Rune Master. After building up through the early game as a mage, we've transitioned into the Rune Master Mastery, and this is where the build really comes together. At this stage, Runic Invocation becomes our core mechanic, letting us craft powerful rune combinations to handle both mobs and single-target fights. Here's how it works. For clearing mobs and area of effect damage, we're using a triple fire rune combo that triggers Airgon's Greater Fireball. This spell is a powerhouse. It delivers massive fire damage in a wide radius, often one-shotting most enemies in its path. The strategy here is straightforward. Activate Flame Rush, our main movement skill, and charge straight through packs of mobs. As they start to chase you, turn around and unleash Airgon's Greater Fireball. The explosion wipes them out in one go, letting you keep moving without slowing down. Flame Rush isn't just for mobility. It deals decent fire damage on its own, so you're chipping away at enemies while you reposition. This combo makes speedrunning through content efficient and smooth, especially for lighter encounters. For single target damage, like bosses or tougher elites, we switch up the runes to a combination of 1 lightning rune and 2 fire runes. This triggers Hydrahedron, a fire-based turret that auto-attacks your target. Once summoned, it locks onto enemies and delivers consistent damage over time, which is perfect for chipping away at high-health foes while you focus on positioning or dodging. It's a reliable helper for sustained fights, and since Runic Invocation is flexible, you can alternate between Hydrahedron and Airgon's Greater Fireball depending on the situation. Mobs get the Fireball, single targets get the turret. Both options keep our fire theme strong and play to the build's strengths. We also have Focus in the mix, though it's not something we lean on constantly. It's more of a utility skill here. Use it sparingly to either tank a big hit you can't avoid, or to top off your mana when you're running low. With Flame Rush and our rune combos doing most of the heavy lifting, Focus is there as a backup rather than a core piece. Mana management gets easier at this stage with better gear, but Focus gives us that extra cushion if we need it. This setup marks the early evolution of our Rune Master build after transitioning from Mage. It's built around mobility with Flame Rush, devastating AoE clears with Airgon's Greater Fireball, and solid single-target support from Hydrahedron, all powered by Runic Invocation. As we progress further into the endgame, we'll refine it based on gear and tougher content. But for now, this gives us a strong, versatile foundation to dominate most encounters.